Hello, everyone. My name is Nate Saal. I'm the founder and CEO of CocoTerra. I want to thank Daniel for hosting us this morning and making this Facebook Live part of his group. I wanted to spend the next, I guess we'll go as long as there are interesting questions from this group. So maybe 15, 20 minutes. But I wanted to tell you a little bit more about CocoTerra, what it does, how it works, and feel free if you have questions, please post a comment. I will track that, and we'll try to address any questions that you may have about the machine, about chocolate making in general, about cacao. Whether it's the physics, chemistry, some of the science of it, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. So first, CocoTerra. So we have developed, you can see the machine right here. We have developed the world's first tabletop bean-to-bar chocolate making machine for the home. And the idea is, in a matter of about 2 hours, you can go from cocoa nibs to solid chocolate and really create sort of a personalized, customized chocolate based on what you want to make. The origins, the blends, the roast, the flavor profiles, the decorations. It really allows you a lot of flexibility in what chocolate you can make on this machine. What I discovered when I sort of started investigating the world of home chocolate making was that it was a messy, complex, and time-consuming process with a pretty steep learning curve if you want to make good chocolate. It's very easy to make bad chocolate, I would say. But if you really want to make good chocolate that you'd be happy to share with your family and friends, you have to start understanding what the processes are, what the transformational steps are. And our CocoTerra machine goes through all the traditional transformational steps, from starting with nibs to solid chocolate. So what does that mean? That means grinding, refining, conching, tempering, molding, and some cooling on there as well. Okay. And again, 2 hours from start to finish. I know a lot of people say there's no way that can happen. That's not possible. If it's doing that, it's going to be gritty. It's not. Trust me. I will explain some of those details and how we can do that and why it works. But in high level, the physics of personal batch chocolate making is very different than the physics of I would say, even if you're making 2 pounds or 20 pounds or 200 pounds. The physics changes when you get to these smaller scales. And so what we're doing is really a personal batch of chocolate. We input 250 grams of chocolate. It's about a half a pound. And so you will result in about 3 to 4 bars of chocolate per batch. Okay. So let's start with what goes in the machine. Well, those of you who are making chocolate at home or have made chocolate at home, typically you're starting with cocoa beans, right? Looks like this. So if you get those beans, you then have to go through a roasting process, which is fairly complicated. You really, again, need to understand what you're doing, how it works. Maybe you have equipment you can try to do in your oven. It's not always great. And then you have to crack those beans and then winnow them. And some people are using hair dryers and shells blowing all over. And it's a pretty messy process and, again, requires some expertise. So what we said was, well, let's look at other industries. In particular, let's look at coffee. Most people are not roasting their own coffee beans. They're actually buying roasted coffee beans. And why shouldn't that, or why couldn't that also happen in the world of chocolate? And so that's what we do. So the starting input for our machine is actually roasted nibs. I guess they could be raw nibs as well, but they're nibs, okay? And so we want to model behaviors and experiences that people are used to and comfortable with. So again, modeling that coffee experience, what you pour into the machine is roasted nibs in most cases. And as you probably know, 4 ingredients, all you need to make pretty much any chocolate, right? White, milk, dark chocolate. Cocoa nibs, sugar, cocoa butter, milk powder. And simply the ratio of those ingredients, or inclusion or exclusion of those ingredients, determines whether it's a white milk or dark, what the percentage is, etc. And you can do all those on this machine, right? White milk, dark, different percentages. And the way the system works is we have recipes. So what we've tried to do is use, smart engineering and sort of innovative software and algorithms that will guide you through the process. So if you really know nothing about chocolate making, that's fine. Pick your recipe, buy your ingredients, or we can have a kit. Follow the instructions. It'll tell you exactly what to do. Right? Pour the ingredients in, and it's fairly hands-off. Literally, you can interact with the machine for about 5 or 10 minutes, and that's all you need to do in terms of real hands-on work. And the machine will go through the grinding, refining, conching, tempering, molding, cooling, all on its own. Now, if you have expertise, for those of you who have made chocolate and know a lot about chocolate making, we do expose all the parameters, many of the parameters in the chocolate making process. So if you want a step to go longer, if you want a step to have a different temperature setting, you can do that. And this does have active heating and cooling, okay, really important. So for every step, you can really dial in what temperature you want it to process at. You can hit target temperatures for tempering. Again, both active heating and cooling. Okay, and that's one of the big differences, for example, between this and many home tempering machines. Those home tempering machines, while they have heating, they rely on ambient, room temperature air to do your cooling. So it's a slow process. Because we're actively cooling our chocolate here, it allows us to really proceed in a much faster pace. Okay, so let me talk about that question of how can we make chocolate in 2 hours? And by the way, let me remind everyone who's joining, feel free to post questions if there's anything that isn't clear or any additional details that you want. I'm happy to respond. I'll be watching the comments. Okay, so how can you make chocolate in 2 hours? So I'll walk through the process that we go through here and how it works and how long the steps are. So the first thing is nibs go right into the machine. I'm going to show you, actually, here's some chocolate. I neglected to show you chocolate that we've made. So let me do that for a second. Here you can see some white chocolate. These are actually decorated with transfer sheets. Those actually go right in our mold. For those of you who haven't worked with transfer sheets, it's quite simple. It's a piece of plastic like this that has printed cocoa butter, colored cocoa butter on it. And when the chocolate hits that, it transfers that decoration. Obviously, these are the nibs that go into the machine. And here's chocolate that we've made. This is a 70% dark chocolate. I believe this is a dark milk chocolate. And I've broken it up into sort of bar-sized pieces and smaller pieces. Or you can keep it in a big ring. And I'll show you. Yes, we'll get to that. This system generates a ring of chocolate. Which here's a little gift box that we did. And the ring of chocolate looks something like this. This one's decorated as well. Okay. And I'll talk about the ring and why a ring and sort of what the benefits are. Okay, so back to this question of how do you make chocolate in 2 hours? So the first thing is, again, we're making a smaller volume, right? We're making a batch that is 250 gram that gets poured into our processing chamber. So if you think about, let's say, the machines that people are using at home today, those are melangers or stone grinders, wet grinders. They're not very efficient, right? So why is that? Well, if you think about the physics of it, again, you have a cylinder, a stone cylinder, in most cases, that's running and rolling on a flat plane, right? A flat bottom. Well, those two shapes only intersect at a line. Right, so that means that all the ingredients get processed only through this thin line of force, right, where it's getting crushed and ground and refined. So what we're doing is we actually have what's called a ball mill. So a ball mill means that you have all the ingredients get poured in there, and you'll see that there are actually balls in here. It's a closed system. The balls don't spill out. Don't worry, no mess in your kitchen. But these balls do all the work. Okay, so rather than having this sort of single line of processing, we have this sort of chaotic motion. You have a lot and lots of interactions that are constantly grinding and refining all the ingredients. Okay, so that's really the first thing, is just this much more efficient processing mechanism. Okay, so, and what do we do? So really the nibs go in first. They get poured in through this top, right? So all the ingredients just pour in through that grate. Those holes are small enough that the balls can't get out, but all the ingredients can get in. Okay. And we typically will grind for about a half hour. In that first half hour, what's happening is you're turning those nibs. Essentially, you're converting it and you're creating chocolate liquor. That means, 100% dark chocolate, essentially. Okay, and at that point, the machine will say, pour in, depending on what recipe you're making, right? If you're just doing a traditional sort of, 2-ingredient chocolate, you just pour in sugar. If you want a little sort of European style or creamier, you put in cocoa butter. If you're making a milk chocolate, you'll also put in milk powder. And all that happens after that first half hour. It then will refine for the next hour. Okay, and again, you can set the temperature, typically, working between, it can be anywhere 100, 130 degrees Fahrenheit. You can set that. And over the next hour, it's going to refine. And what's going to happen there? Again, you're going to now process all those ingredients and get them down. And people have often asked, well, what particle size can you get to? I typically aim for about 20 micron. That's what I prefer. And that's average. That's the average particle size. I simply use a micrometer typically to measure. So that's really probably measuring the larger particles rather than the smaller particles. So when I measure, the larger particles are 20 microns. Okay, the largest, I should say. You can go longer. That's in that, if you want to make chocolate in 2 hours, you can go another, 15, 20, half hour, and it'll get smaller. You can target, 15 microns. Personally, I don't like much under 15. I think it makes the chocolate, I've tasted, at 12, it starts tasting gummy to me. But again, you get to choose sort of what the target is. Okay. So that's the refining step. Conching. So interesting question. There are obviously different opinions on conching. Some obviously as part of flavor development, part of texture development. What you'll find, and conching can be one of the long poles in chocolate making. But again, we're gonna get into science. We're gonna get into physics here. The system is much more efficient at, let's say, aerating and manipulating the chocolate than a typical stone grinder and refiner. So why? Well, again, let's look at the physics of spheres. So the geometry. So if you have a large sphere, think about a basketball, and you were to take the ratio of the surface area to the volume, it's very different for a basketball than, let's say, a golf ball, right? The smaller you get, the more surface area you have per volume, right? For the volume that you have. Again, we're doing the small batch. So that means that we're much more efficient at exposing the chocolate, the surface aeration, and the shear forces that we're manipulating the chocolate with at the smaller volume. Okay. The other thing you have to realize is that instead of using one large stone, we have lots and lots of small balls. So that means not only, it's not really a sphere, right? You have this chocolate that's coating all these balls. So now the surface area is magnified, right? There's a multiplying factor there even more. So that means that the aeration that we get and the manipulation that we get is much more efficient on this system than it is on a stone grinder, okay? Typically, that's my personal preference, I don't do a separate conching step. In the hour and a half that those ingredients are being manipulated and aerated and exposed and the shear forces are being imparted, I find that to be sufficient. But obviously people have different opinions and different preferences. And so, of course, the system has been designed so that you can, let's have a recipe with a long conching step. And again, you can set that to whatever you want. Again, you can set the temperature. It won't over refine because it will slow down, right? So once we get into a conching mode, rather than grinding it and really imparting a lot of energy into the system through a faster speed, we actually just slow down the system. We can increase the temperature. And then essentially, again, the physics of the system is such that we don't impart a lot of force. There isn't a lot of force or energy in the system, so that slows down and or stops much of the refining process. Okay, so you can now do a longer refining, a longer conch at a lower speed. Now, the other strange thing that we're doing, moving on to the next step, or unusual thing, is tempering. We're actually tempering in a ball mill. So what are the keys to tempering? What are those two steps? Well, first, you need the right shear forces. That means you need like a wiping force, okay? And you need the right temperature, right? So you need to be at that form 5 crystallization zone for those seed crystals to generate. And so what we do, again, as I mentioned, we have active cooling. So it's cooling at a couple degrees per minute. And in about 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes is what it takes to temper the chocolate in the system, okay? And the shear forces in there, there are actually a few different shear forces that are happening there. The first is there is a paddle, a blade that's turning around. So you have this sort of blade to ball interaction. You have the ball to ball interaction, and you have the balls to the walls, right? The interior walls of this processing chamber. So there are actually 3 different, slightly different shear forces that are occurring in here. It's sufficient to generate the seed crystals. Typically what we're doing is hitting that target temperature. It's holding for a short period of time, and then we go into the molding process. And I'll finish with that. So there's a question on the cooling. So it is neither a fan nor a condenser. So what we're doing is actually using something called a TEC, or a Peltier device. It is a solid state ceramic chip. If you just put a small voltage across that, it has this interesting, it's called the Peltier effect. One side of this chip becomes scorchingly hot, and the other side, it becomes instantly cool. And what we do is essentially when we want to heat, we apply a voltage and we heat the system. So when we're grinding, refining. And then when we want to cool, we actually just flip the voltage, and it all of a sudden becomes a cooler. So it's a pretty interesting technology. If you haven't looked at it or don't know much about it, you can certainly search online. It's called a thermoelectric cooler, a TEC, or a Peltier device. And so that's a very compact, very efficient, well, not necessarily, cooling is never efficient, but from a size perspective, very efficient way of doing it. So that's how we're heating and cooling. There's essentially an interface, a plate at the bottom and the base of this unit, which is where all the heat transfer happens. And so the chamber, you'll see at the bottom, has this plate, and that interfaces with the thermal plate, and that allows us to control the temperature. And it is a closed loop system. That means we're always monitoring the temperature, and if you're hitting a target temperature, it's reading temperatures, and that's controlling, right, how much power is given to our heating or cooling system, and allows you to really stay within a pretty close to the target temperature. Okay, let me jump into our molding process, because we do something quite unusual. We're doing centrifugal molding. That means we're spinning the chocolate into the mold, when we're spinning, we're not only spinning the chamber and getting the chocolate out, and that's really one of the benefits. Rather than relying on gravity, rather than relying on pumps, we actually can control the force, the molding force. So we actually spin this chamber, okay? And that shoots the chocolate. There's a small, at the bottom, there's a little seal that opens up, okay? And that seal, and I'll show you that in a second here, that seal allows you to get the chocolate out and then in actually through a filter. So the first thing is we filter it and we shoot it into this mold. And our mold is a bit unusual. It's a ring, right? It's a ring mold. It's a 2-part mold with a filter in it, okay? And so if there are any unprocessed nibs, germ, anything that may get into the chamber, we filter that out. And we actually spin the mold as well, right? So that allows the chocolate to shoot through the mold, through the filter and into the mold. And so in some ways, we're actually, we're injection molding chocolate. We're forcing it into this mold that's spinning. So you can do some interesting things with 2-part molds once you sort of think about that process. But we result in a ring of chocolate. So it is sort of bar shaped, but you end up with initially an unbroken, beautiful ring of chocolate. I know kids sort of look at it and they fantasize that it's a crown of chocolate. Other people who are into baking or cooking want to fill it with all kinds of treats. So it's quite a fun shape. Of course, you can just break it up. There's something really wonderful to sitting down at a table and breaking it up and sharing pieces. And that was one of our objectives, which is you start a batch of chocolate before dinner, and by dessert time you have this fresh batch of chocolate that maybe people voted on, what had a preference on what they wanted to make. And the nice thing is that you can do a lot of, you can be really creative. You can put flavorings into the processing chamber, and those will get incorporated into the chocolate. You can put transfer sheets, as I mentioned, into the mold. So you can see right here, if I had this is just a short little piece, but it just stands up right here on the edge like that. And when the chocolate gets spun into the mold, it transfers that decoration onto the chocolate, and you'll see these are from Valrhona, these transfer sheets. You can also put inclusions in. So actually you can drop dried fruits, nuts, crisps, Rice Crisps into that mold, and the chocolate will get mixed in with that and allow you to have inclusions in your chocolate. And so, yeah, and it only takes about 2 minutes to really spin all this chocolate out. We then usually keep it rotating for a few more minutes until it solidifies. You can actually stop it, and if you wanted to, you can take it off and bang the chocolate into this bottom half, and so you'll get more of a different shape. You get sort of this chunk of chocolate, more of a chunk style, with inclusions that tends to work really well. Obviously you could invert the mold if there was a pattern. For example, I don't have it right here, but you can put it, we have imprints like with our logo on them in the chocolate. And after it's solidified, I mean, obviously the cheat is you can stick it in the fridge for a little bit, or stick it in the freezer very quickly, and you can instantly start eating. And I do want to touch on one thing, which is fresh chocolate. For those of you who've made chocolate at home, you're probably aware of this, but right after you mold chocolate for about 12 hours or so, while the chocolate is solid, it is really a different experience, right? The way it melts in your mouth, and the way you get to taste the flavors and the texture, it's really something different and exceptional. Most people are buying chocolate in the stores, don't have that luxury. But here, if you're making it and then serving it with a dinner, it's a wonderful, really wonderful experience. So fresh chocolate, freshly molded chocolate is wonderful. There's one last question here. It says, can we hear the snap for science? Sure. I think you wanted to hear one of these, a snap. I don't know how well you're going to be able to hear this, but I'll be quiet and we'll go for a snap here. Okay. So if there are any more questions, please post them and I will address them, but we'll be wrapping up here shortly. Again, I want to thank you all for joining us and learning a little bit more about CocoTerra and how it works to really simplify the chocolate making process for home users. All right, we got one more question coming in here. Let's see. Question is, how does cleaning work? Can you make your own recipes? And how much cacao do you put in? Okay, so obviously the amount of cacao you put in depends on the recipe that you're making. So I'll give you an example. If you're doing 100% dark chocolate that's single ingredient, it would be 250 grams. Typically, if you're making a 70% dark chocolate, it's about 160, 165 grams of nibs. And obviously, if you're making milk and white no nibs, milk, it's about a quarter of the ingredients are nibs. In terms of cleaning, it's a really good question. It's actually quite simple to clean. People look at it and they say, oh my gosh, it's full of balls. How do you clean that out? Well, the balls actually clean the system. So what do I mean by that? Well, the balls have intimate contact with the entire interior surface. And so if I just start pouring water in there, and again, there's that the seal that opens up at the bottom where the chocolate comes out. the chocolate comes flushing out. And if I just start shaking it and the balls start swirling around there, the balls clean the entire interior surface. If you've ever washed or tried to clean a decanter, a wine decanter, that's actually how it works. You get sent balls that you put in the decanter that you spin around to clean the inside. And so we already have that built into our system. Ideally, that's if you want to wash it in the sink, and that takes 2-3 minutes, literally just rinsing water through. The goal is really to put it in the dishwasher. So you'll rinse it for a little bit, put it in the dishwasher. The molds go into the dishwasher, and it's a pretty simple clean. Let's see. Another question. Let's see. Oh, recipes. Yes. Yes. So there are really sort of 3 modes. One is you can simply look through a collection, navigate through a collection of recipes, find something that's appealing to you, and select that recipe, and the machine will sort of guide you along. You can take that recipe, and if, let's say, it's a 70% dark chocolate recipe and you want to modify it a little bit, you want to put cinnamon in it, you can actually take one of those recipes and you can change it. You can tweak it. If you're sort of new to chocolate making, but you want to create your own recipe, we actually we have an app that works with the machine. You don't have to use it, but if there are these more, I guess, more in-depth experiences that you want, I would highly recommend that you use the app. We actually have a guided recipe creation mode. So what's interesting about chocolate, right, is that you can describe the characteristics of it, what you want it to taste like, what you want the mouthfeel to be, what kind of chocolate, is it a white milk or dark? And if I ask you a series of questions, I can translate those into a recipe that approximates what it is that you desire to make. And so we've actually built that into our app. So we call it a guided recipe creation mode. So most beginner chocolate makers really don't know like what percent, how much, nibs, how much, and I even saw this in the group, right? If I want to make, X percent, what percentage of cacao versus nibs versus cocoa butter, et cetera. So the app will actually guide you through that and help you with all the sort of default parameters for a recipe. There's also the expert mode where you can literally just type in, if you know what you want to make, you type it in, and you can set the parameters and really sort of get into the weeds. And that was one of the, I would say, more challenging parts of this endeavor, which is how do we create a machine that for someone who literally has no chocolate making experience can be successful, be essentially hand-holded through the process, but still have sort of the creativity and options to have fun with the machine and making the chocolate they want without sort of dumbing it down too much, so that people who do have experience and expertise can come into this and still use those expertise to tweak and change the settings. And so I think we've struck a really nice balance on that. In terms of the yield, so again, 250 grams go in. Typically, we're doing about 90% yield on that. And so what is that? Well, there's some shell that doesn't get processed, some nibs that don't get processed, the germ that doesn't get processed. There's a thin coating, obviously, on the chamber and balls. But the goal is about a 90 or above % yield on that. Okay. Okay, so a couple more questions, and I'll keep going as long as you have questions. I'll keep answering them. There was a question about praline or nut butter in it. So in fact, yes, this makes the best, at least in my opinion, hazelnut chocolate spread. I essentially have toasted my own hazelnuts. You put them in the machine with nibs. Cocoa butter, so there's no palm oil, and I put a little salt, a little vanilla. It's amazing. I mean, really, really deep hazelnut flavor. So yes, so you can do that. Now, not all nuts will grind perfectly on this. There's some that are harder than others, as you've probably experienced if you've made nut butters. But yeah, and that's really, look, what we want to do is provide this system and allow people to experiment and explore and try new things. We haven't tried anything, and I'm sure there are people out there who will come up with things we didn't even think about, uses for the machine. So yes, there is this really, I'll call it food hacking. Yes, we will encourage food hacking, and we want people to really experiment and play. Another question, how much chocolate can you get per batch? Yeah, so you know, again, it's about the equivalent of about 3 or 4 bars of chocolate. At 250 grams of ingredients go in, we're yielding about 90% of that in the mold. Okay, what about reworking? Will you have to temper it, or what can you do with the chocolate? Yeah, so you can certainly remelt. Again, the system will generate the seed crystals and do the I guess we'll call it it's called a wild temper, right? Wild seeding method. So we're not putting in seed. We're not table tempering. The machine actually will generate the seed crystal, and it will result in tempered chocolate. So now, if you don't want to use a ring mold, yes, you can certainly take that chocolate and melt it. And if you know about the sort of the seeding method, typically in short form, you take about 2/3 of the chocolate, chop it up, melt it. You can do it very easily in a microwave on about 10-second intervals, so you don't scorch the chocolate. And then, you know, take the remaining chocolate that's chopped up and start stirring it back in when it's at about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and that will reseed it, and then you can pour it in whatever molds you want. Yeah, there are some people who ask, well, can I pour it right from the machine? It depends on the recipe, right? So there's some chocolates, depending on the fat percentage, that are going to be quite viscous, and there are some chocolates that will be quite fluid. And so if it is a more fluid chocolate, yes, you can actually take it right out of the mold. You can pour it. You can put it in your own tempering machine or table temper it, and then pour it into your own molds. So that is certainly possible. So yeah, again, what we've tried to do is what we try to do is work with within the industry and within the norms and sort of people's expectations as much as possible, and that even goes to the ingredients. It's an open system. You can source your own beans and roast and winnow and come up with your own recipes. That's certainly 100% possible. But we're also going to try to make it simple for people. So we are going to work with chocolate makers. They generate nibs as part of their process. And what the challenge is that consumers typically don't have access to that supply chain. And so what we're going to be doing is actually working with the chocolate makers, craft chocolate makers, other importers, and even maybe back to the farms who are willing to generate nibs and make those available to consumers and generate recipes that are tied to those ingredients that have been tested. So we know people will be successful. Okay, so question from Kit here. Can you use the temper setting to temper cocoa butter and use that for seeding? Yeah, so people have asked, well, can I just pour liquor in here and then put sugar and other flavorings and use it that way? Yes. Can I just pour chocolate in here and use it as a tempering machine? Yes. Yes, you can certainly do that. And if you don't want to go through the temp, if you're going to use, let's say, the chocolate for drinking or chocolate for baking, obviously you can skip the tempering step. You can create a program, a recipe that doesn't include a tempering step. So all these things will cut time, and it'll be even less than 2 hours. So you can certainly do all of that. Again, our goal is to think about each of these processing steps as separate entities. And you can create recipes that include or exclude them. Obviously, there are going to be more ideas that people come up with. And we'll obviously keep making updates to the software, both the software on the system and the software on the mobile app. And we'll continually make improvements. And when you have ideas, we're happy to sort of adapt and modify the software to add new functionality over time. So I will encourage you. I'm going to wrap up here. Thank everyone for participating. We have a CocoTerra VIP group. Please join that if you're into chocolate and you want to have ideas or suggestions. If you have questions, please post them to the comment section of this video. This will be up, and you can view it at any time. And we will monitor the comments and post questions. We are open for pre-orders now. So if you are interested in pre-ordering one of these CocoTerra machines, you can go to CocoTerra.com, which is CocoTerra.com. and you can put in an order for a CocoTerra system. We are still on our first batch, so if you want to be one of the first to get a system, we do have limited quantity available. So hop over there now, and we have early bird pricing. And I'm sorry to say, for those of you who are watching this from sort of internationally, right now we're first shipping to the U.S. Only. So sorry to disappoint any of you. The system is designed to support both 110 and 220. So obviously, being able to use this in Europe and other countries is not a problem over time. So again, thank you, everyone. Go check us out at CocoTerra.com. If you have any other questions, please post the comments, and we'll see you around. Make chocolate.